The men came for her at 2 a.m., not with warnings, not with knocking. They cut the power to her building first, then used bolt cutters on the stairwell door, and they moved through the dark hallway, the way people move when they have done this before and feel nothing about doing it again. Apartment 4C, third door on the left. They had her address, her schedule, the color of her scrubs. What they didn't know was that she wasn't home. And the one man who had made certain of that, the man every cop in Chicago feared to name aloud, was standing in a snowstorm with his hand pressed against her shoulder, watching her face like someone who had been waiting 11 years for a ghost to come back to life. If that were your door, your name on the list, what would you have done? Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week we bring you stories that will keep you up past midnight. Stories that ask the hardest questions about loyalty, sacrifice, and what people will do for the ones they love. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Now, let's go back to the night Vivian Hale's life ended, and something far more complicated began. Vivian had been on her feet for 14 hours. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that by the time she finally pushed through the ambulance bay doors and stepped out into the Chicago night, the storm that the weather app had described as moderate accumulation had turned the city into something that no longer looked like a city at all. The streetlights were still on, but they illuminated nothing useful. Just curtains of white coming sideways, hard enough to sting the parts of her face not covered by her scarf. She stood under the overhang for a moment, bag over one shoulder, the kind of exhaustion sitting in her bones that doesn't respond to coffee anymore. Her feet hurt in the specific way that only nurses and waitresses truly understand. Not muscle soreness, but something deeper, something structural, like her body was filing a formal complaint. The L wasn't running. She'd gotten the notification somewhere around hour 11, between a chest compression and a family meeting she hadn't been emotionally prepared for. So she'd texted her friend Dana asking if she could crash somewhere, but Dana was in Evanston with her boyfriend, and the roads between them were a full catastrophe. She could call a cab. She could wait. She could stand under this overhang until the storm broke, which the same weather app now suggested would not happen until sometime around 6 in the morning. Or she could walk 3 blocks to the Alderton, the hotel that one of the surgeons had mentioned once while complaining about a charity gala, and ask if they had anything available under $200, which they almost certainly did not, but it was worth trying. She pulled her scarf up over her nose and walked. The wind on Wacker Drive was a different animal than the wind anywhere else in Chicago. It came off the river and hit the buildings at angles that turned the gaps between skyscrapers into something like wind tunnels, and Vivian had lived here long enough to know to lean into it rather than fight it. She leaned, she walked, she counted the blocks. She was not thinking about danger. That was the part she would turn over in her mind later, in the weeks and months that followed, trying to understand her own obliviousness. She was thinking about the patient in Bay 6, who had looked at her with the specific quiet terror of someone who knows they are very sick and is trying not to show it. She was thinking about whether she'd charted the potassium levels correctly before leaving. She was thinking, distantly, about whether there was anything in her apartment worth eating that didn't require more than 4 minutes of effort. She was not thinking about the 2 men who had parked a dark sedan across the street from her building 40 minutes earlier. She was not thinking about the 3rd man who had gone upstairs to verify the apartment number. She was not thinking about any of it, because she had no reason to. The Alderton's lobby doors slid open and she nearly fell through them. The warmth hit her like a wall. After the shrieking cold outside, the lobby felt almost obscene in its comfort. Marble floors, the kind of flower arrangements that cost more than her monthly grocery budget, a chandelier that probably had its own insurance policy. Vivian stood just inside the doors and dripped melted snow onto the floor and was aware, immediately, that she looked like something the storm had dragged in. Which she was. She pushed her scarf down and started toward the front desk, blinking the cold out of her eyes, her sneakers leaving wet prints across the marble, and she was moving faster than she should have been because she was tired and cold and not paying attention to the space around her, and that was when she walked directly into a man's chest. Not grazed him, not bumped his shoulder. Full collision, her forehead against his sternum, her bag swinging sideways and hitting something or someone behind her, the sound of something shifting, and then the very particular sound of several large men moving all at once. She stumbled backward. Her hand shot out for balance and found nothing. "I'm so sorry," she said, before she'd even fully registered what she'd walked into. 12 years of Midwestern reflexes. Apologize first, assess second. "I'm sorry, I wasn't... The storm, I was just trying to..." She looked up. The man she had walked into was not looking at her the way people look at someone who has just inconvenienced them. He was not annoyed. He was not reaching for his phone or brushing off his jacket or doing any of the things a person does when a wet, tired woman in hospital scrubs crashes into them in a hotel lobby. He was completely still, and the four men who had arranged themselves around him in the half-second after the collision, large men, expensive coats, the particular posture of people whose job is to stand between other people and harm, were staring at her with their hands not quite at their sides. Vivian had spent enough years in emergency medicine to recognize threat response when she saw it. The body doesn't lie about that. These men had threat response bodies. "I'm so sorry," she said again, more carefully this time. The man still hadn't spoken. He was perhaps 40, though something about the stillness of his face made age feel like an irrelevant category. Dark hair, a little gray at the temples, a scar at the edge of his jaw that had healed a long time ago and healed clean. I was wearing a coat that cost more than her car payment, and he was looking at her like she was a word in a language he'd stopped believing anyone still spoke. "Sir," she said. One of the large men took a half step forward. "Ma'am, you need to step back." I'm checking in. I need a room. The storm..." "Step back, please." "Marcus." The voice came from the still man, and it was quiet, but the large man stopped moving the instant he heard it. Just stopped, like the word had a switch in it. The still man hadn't taken his eyes off Vivian. "Give us a moment." The large man, Marcus, looked at Vivian the way a guard dog looks at something it hasn't decided about yet, but he stepped back. Vivian's instincts were telling her several things simultaneously, and none of them were comfortable. But she was also 31 years old and had worked nights in a Chicago ER for 6 years, and she had learned to think clearly when her instincts were screaming, which was exactly what made her good at her job. "I'm sorry I walked into you," she said, level and direct. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I just need a room for the night." "What's your name?" the man said. It was not a question she had expected. "I'm sorry?" "Your name." He was still looking at her with that expression she couldn't read. "What is it?" Vivian considered not answering. She also considered that she was standing in the lobby of the most expensive hotel she had ever entered, surrounded by men who were almost certainly carrying weapons, and that the safest option was probably not confrontation. "Vivian," she said. "Vivian Hale." The lobby, in that moment, was very quiet. Later she would try to describe what happened to the man's face when she said her name, and she never quite found the right words. It wasn't shock, exactly. It was more like recognition, the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for something to happen and has almost stopped believing it will, and then it does. Something shifted in him, something that had been held very tightly, for a very long time, let go just enough to show at the corners of his eyes. "Vivian Hale," he repeated. "Yes." He looked at her for another long moment. Then he said quietly to the man behind his left shoulder, not Marcus, a different one, younger, with a phone already in his hand, "Get Riaz on the line, right now." The younger man moved away immediately, already dialing. "What's happening?" Vivian said. The man looked back at her. "Do you still live on Fullerton, apartment 4C? Vivian went very still. Do you know where I live? Yes or no? Who are you? Yes or no, Vivian?" She didn't answer because the answer was yes, and something in the way he'd asked the question was making the back of her neck do something unpleasant. The younger man came back. He held the phone out. Whatever the person on the other end said, the still man listened to it without any visible reaction. Then he lowered the phone and handed it back. And he looked at Vivian with an expression that was calm in the way that a decision is calm after it's already been made. "There are 3 men in your building right now," he said. "They were there 20 minutes ago when we drove past. They went in through the service entrance." The cold Vivian had walked in from was nothing compared to what moved through her in that moment. "They're looking for you," he said, "and they are not going to leave when they don't find you." You're, you're telling me my apartment is being broken into right now. I'm telling you that if you go home tonight, you won't survive it. The words hit her like a flat surface, no give to them, no cushion. And I'm supposed to, what? Trust you? I don't even know your name. He looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then, Lucien Voss. She didn't recognize it. That was the honest truth. She had spent 6 years in Chicago, had worked nights in the city's bloodiest ER, had heard every name that came through on police scanners and in news updates and in the hushed conversations nurses have during shift change, and she did not, in that moment, recognize Lucien Voss. She would. Later. But right then, she was just a very tired woman in wet scrubs, standing in a warm lobby with melted snow in her hair, being told that her apartment was not safe by a man who knew her address and her full name and looked at her like she was someone he had expected to find. "Why would anyone want to break into my apartment?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said, "Is there somewhere you can go, family, someone they wouldn't know to look for?" "My mother died 4 years ago. There's no one." Something moved across his face. "Your father." It wasn't a question. It was a key fitting a lock. "My father died when I was 19, Vivian said, and her voice did the thing it still did sometimes, even now, 12 years later, went slightly flat, like the words were wrapped in something protective so they wouldn't cut on the way out. "I know," Lucien said. I was there." The lobby lights hummed. Somewhere above them, the ventilation system ticked against the cold. A hotel employee on the far end of the desk was carefully not looking in their direction. Vivian stared at him. "You were there," she said. "Not when he died. Before." He paused. "He asked me to find you, if it ever came to this. I told him I would." Another pause, the kind that has weight in it. "I kept my word." She should have walked out. Every rational thought she possessed was pointing toward the door, toward the storm, the snow, the anonymous cold, anything but this man, and this conversation, and the specific feeling crawling up her spine. But her apartment was on Fullerton, apartment 4C, and he had known that without her telling him, and 3 men had gone in through the service entrance. And her father had died when she was 19, slowly, over the course of 2 years, of something the doctors had called a progressive illness, and that had never, not once, felt complete to her as an explanation. "My car is outside," Lucien said. "You don't have to talk to me. You don't have to answer any questions. But I need you to come with me right now because the men in your building will not stay there indefinitely, and when they leave, they will start looking for you." Vivian looked at him. She had spent her career making fast decisions under pressure. She had placed IVs in veins she could barely see, called time of death, told families things no family should have to hear. She was not someone who froze. She did not freeze now. "If you're lying to me," she said, "or if this is some kind of—" "I'm not." "Then I want answers. All of them. Tonight." "You'll have them." She picked up her bag from where it had fallen when she'd collided with him. She looked at the marble floor, then back up at his face, and she made the kind of choice that cannot be unmade, not because it was the right choice or the safe choice, but because it was the only one that accounted for everything she had just been told. "Okay," she said. Outside, the blizzard was still going. The armored SUV was waiting at the curb, engine running, exhaust rising white into the dark air. Marcus held the door open. Vivian got in, her wet scrubs leaving a dark patch on the leather seat, her hospital badge still clipped to her chest. The door closed. The city disappeared behind the snow. And in the silence of the moving vehicle, with 3 armed men in the front and Lucien Voss sitting across from her without speaking, Vivian Hale pressed her hands flat against her thighs and breathed, and tried to understand what her father had kept from her for the last 12 years of her life, and what exactly had just walked into the storm alongside her. She was still wearing her name badge, Vivian Hale, RN, Emergency Department. Nobody had told her she was going to need it. The SUV moved through the blizzard like something that belonged to a different city than the one outside its windows. Vivian could feel the weight of the vehicle, not just the physical mass of it, but something structural, something intentional, like it had been built to absorb damage rather than avoid it. The windows were tinted to the point of opacity from outside. The seats were leather, but not the showroom kind. They were worn in specific places, at the edges of the headrests, along the door panels, in ways that suggested long hours and serious use. Nobody was talking. Marcus was in the front passenger seat, his right shoulder angled slightly toward the window, his eyes moving between the side mirror and something on his phone. The driver, young, crew-cut, expression like a closed door, navigated the storm without apparent difficulty, which meant he had done this before in conditions exactly like this, and that thought alone was enough to make Vivian's stomach tighten. Lucian sat across from her, not beside her. He'd chosen the seat that faced backward, which she didn't understand until she realized it meant he could watch her without making it look like he was watching her. His coat was still on. His hands rested on his knees. He was not looking at his phone. He was looking at her. "You said you were there," Vivian said, "before my father died. What does that mean?" "It means what it sounds like." "That's not an answer." "I know." He didn't look apologetic about it. "There are things I need to show you before I explain them. If I tell you first, you won't believe me." "Try me." His jaw moved slightly. Not quite a smile. "Your father's name was Arthur Hale. He went by Art. He had a coffee mug on his desk that said, 'World's okayest dad,' and he kept it even after you gave it to him as a joke because he thought it was honest." Vivian's throat did something she didn't have control over. "He made pancakes every Sunday," Lucian continued, his voice the same quiet register throughout, no performance in it. "He was left-handed, but he learned to write with his right because a teacher told him it would be better for him. He never stopped being angry about that. And he had a scar on his left palm from a knife accident when he was 14 that he told you was from saving a cat." "It wasn't from a cat," Vivian said. It came out flat. "No." She looked out the tinted window at nothing. "He told me he fell off a fence. He told different people different things about that and about most everything else." Lucian paused. "He was a private man. He was an accountant. He was the most boring, careful, ordinary man I have ever known in my life." She heard her own voice and didn't entirely recognize it. "He drove a 2003 Civic with a bumper sticker about public radio. He had a checkbook, an actual physical checkbook that he balanced by hand every month. He worried about things like whether the gutters were clean." "Yes. So what are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that the Civic and the checkbook and the gutters were real." He leaned forward slightly, elbows to knees, and for the first time his voice dropped just enough to become something more personal than professional. "And I'm telling you that underneath all of it, your father was the most dangerous man I have ever personally known, not because of what he could do with his hands, because of what he carried in his head." The SUV hit a patch of something and shuddered slightly before the driver corrected. Nobody reacted. "He was an accountant," Vivian said again. "He was the accountant. For an organization that moved more money through Chicago in a single fiscal quarter than most mid-sized banks handle in a year." Lucian's eyes didn't waver. "Every hidden account, every offshore transfer, every layered shell company in a network that took 30 years to build, your father memorized it. All of it. Never wrote a single number down, kept it here." He touched his temple briefly. "Because he understood that paper can be found and people can be searched. But a man who looks like he drives a Civic and worries about gutters is the last person anyone thinks to ask." Vivian sat with that for a moment. "Whose organization?" she said. "A beat. Mine," Lucian said. "My father's before me." She had known it was coming. She had known from the lobby, from the armed men, from the armored car, and the way Marcus had moved when Lucian spoke. She had known it the way you know a diagnosis when you're still waiting for the test results. The body figures it out before the brain catches up. It still landed. "You're telling me my father worked for the mob." "I'm telling you your father worked for my family. What you call it is your business." "Those are the same thing." "They are," he agreed, without flinching. She felt the anger move through her like heat, quick and clean. "And you knew him. You knew who he was and what he did, and for 12 years nobody ever told me. Nobody said a word. That was the agreement." "What agreement? Who agreed to that?" "I didn't agree to anything." "No, you didn't." His voice was careful. "He did. Your father specifically asked that you be kept out of it, entirely. He made that the condition of everything." "The condition of what?" "Of him working for us at all." The wind outside found a gap somewhere in the vehicle's frame and made a sound like pressure releasing. Vivian pressed her back against the seat, and made herself breathe through her nose slowly, the way she did when a situation in the ER was moving faster than she could narrate. "He's been dead for 12 years, she said. "Yes. And someone is breaking into my apartment right now because of something he did 12 years ago. Because of something he knew. The accounts are still active, the money is still there, and the man who killed your father has been looking for the records for 11 years. Lucian's voice didn't change, but something in it tightened slightly. "He finally found out about you 6 weeks ago. "Who?" she said. "His name is Salvatore De Luca." She didn't know that name either. She was beginning to think her entire life had been a surface with nothing underneath it that she'd actually understood. "He killed my father," she said. "Yes. And you, your family, you just let that happen." It was a grenade, and she knew it was a grenade when she threw it. She watched it land on his face. His jaw tightened. The space between his eyebrows shifted by a fraction. Something moved through his eyes that was not comfortable to look at. "No," he said. "We didn't let it happen. We failed to stop it. Those are different things." "Not to me." "I know," he said. "They're not the same to me either." The SUV slowed, turned. Vivian felt the incline of a parking structure, heard the echo of the enclosed space replace the muffled sound of the storm. They were somewhere underground. Marcus was already opening his door before the vehicle stopped moving. "We're here," Lucian said unnecessarily. "Where is here?" "Somewhere safe." "You keep saying words like that," she said. "Safe. Trust. I need you to understand that those words don't mean anything to me right now. Not from you." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, once like he was accepting a fair point. "Then I'll show you instead." The penthouse was on the 43rd floor, and it didn't look the way she'd expected. She had braced herself for something theatrical. Dark wood, low lighting, the aesthetic of a man who wanted to be feared. What she got was a space that looked like it had been lived in by someone who didn't care much about how things looked. There were books on the coffee table. Not arranged books, but books left open and face down, which was the kind of thing that made librarians wince. There was a jacket over the back of a dining chair that no one had moved. There were dishes in the drying rack beside the sink. It looked like a home, which for some reason was more unsettling than a fortress would have been. Marcus disappeared through a side door. The younger one, she'd heard him called Reyes, positioned himself near the elevator without being told. Lucian moved to a steel cabinet beside the kitchen, the kind that locks, and produced a key from his jacket pocket. When he opened it, he removed a file and set it on the table without ceremony. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand." He didn't argue. He opened the file and turned it so she could see. The first page was a photograph. Black and white, slightly grainy, a surveillance image. 2 men at a table in what looked like a restaurant. One of them was older, heavy-set, with the posture of someone who owned the room. The other one, Vivian's hand came up to her mouth before she could stop it. The other one was her father, younger, pre-gray, but unmistakably him. The slope of his shoulders, the way he held his coffee cup with both hands, the particular angle of his head when he was listening carefully to someone. "That was taken in 1998, Lucien said. He'd been working with my father for 3 years at that point." She couldn't take her eyes off the photograph. Her father looked calm. He looked, she realized, the same way he always looked, careful and private and slightly amused by something he wasn't sharing. He had always looked like that. She had thought it was just who he was. It was who he was. She just hadn't known what it meant. "What happened to him?" she said. "Exactly." Lucian was quiet for a moment. "He was taken in the spring of 2001. We didn't know immediately. De Luca was careful. By the time we found him, it was—" He stopped. "Tell me." "It took them 2 weeks," he said. "They were methodical. They were trying to get the account numbers out of him, and he gave them nothing, not one number in 2 weeks." His voice was measured, but underneath the measure there was something grinding. "He sent a message through a guard who owed my family a debt. The message was one line. It said, 'Keep the girl out of this, or I start forgetting.'" Vivian turned away from the photograph. She walked to the window. 43 floors up, Chicago was a blur of white and amber through the glass. The storm still going, the lake invisible in the dark beyond the buildings. Her father had sat in a room for 2 weeks and not said a word. She had been 19. She had been in her second year of pre-nursing at a school downstate. And in April of that year, she'd gotten a call from a hospital in Chicago telling her that her father had been found. They had been careful with their language. She hadn't fully understood what careful language meant until she got there. She had told herself for 12 years that it had been a mugging, an escalation, the wrong place, wrong time. She had told herself that because that was what the police report said, and she had been 19 and had needed something to hold. He never told them anything, she said. No. Even at the end. No. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. And after. Who paid for my school? My housing? There were scholarships, grants. I applied for everything, every year because I had to. The silence from behind her was the specific kind that means someone is deciding how much to say. Lucien. Yes, he said, one word. She felt it move through her. All of it? Most of it. For 11 years. Yes. She turned from the window. He was standing where she'd left him, beside the table, and he was watching her with an expression that she still couldn't completely read, but was beginning to understand was the expression of a man who had carried something heavy for a long time, and was finally setting it down in front of the person who should have been carrying it. You had people watching me, she said. Yes. In my neighborhood. Near the hospital. The full scope of it was coming into focus, and it was enormous, the size of her entire adult life. For 11 years, someone has been watching me. Protecting you. That's not... She stopped herself. She pressed her teeth together. You don't get to decide what that is. You kept this from me for 11 years. You made decisions about my life that weren't yours to make, and you did it because my father asked you to when I was a child who couldn't consent to anything. I'm not a child anymore. I know that. Do you? Her voice was steady, but her hands were not entirely. She was aware of them and kept them still with effort. Because you're standing there like you did me a favor, like I'm supposed to be grateful. I don't expect gratitude. Then what do you expect? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he said. Honestly, I've thought about this conversation for a long time and I don't know what I expected. That surprised her, the honesty of it. She had braced for deflection and gotten something that had the texture of an actual admission, and it threw off her footing slightly. She sat down, not because she wanted to, but because her body had been awake for 16 hours and was filing that formal complaint more loudly now. The men in my apartment, she said. What do they want? What DeLuca has wanted for 11 years, the account numbers, the codes. I don't have any account numbers. I don't know any codes. Lucien looked at her carefully. Your father never taught you anything? Games, maybe, songs, patterns he gave you when you were young that seemed like one thing but could have been. He taught me checkers. He taught me how to balance a checkbook, which I still do by hand because of him. She paused. He taught me a lot of songs. Something shifted in Lucien's expression. Songs, he said, bedtime songs. He made them up. He said they were old, traditional, but I could never find them anywhere, and She stopped. Why are you looking at me like that? What kind of songs? Just lullabies, simple things. Why? He sat down across from her, and for the first time since the lobby, he looked like something was moving behind the stillness of his face, something working itself through. Did you ever try to write them down? I know them by heart. I've known them since I was 6 years old. What does this have to do with Vivian? He leaned forward. Did your father ever tell you why he made those songs up? Did he explain what they were for? She stared at him. They were lullabies. They were for going to sleep. Were they? His voice was very quiet. Or were they something else that sounded like lullabies? The room was warm. The storm was outside. 43 floors down, the city was still buried in white. And Vivian Hale sat in the home of a man she had met 90 minutes ago and felt the ground beneath 12 years of her life begin to tilt. That was when the door opened. Not the elevator, the side door, the one Marcus had gone through. And Marcus came through it now, but his face was different than it had been. The professional blankness was gone. What was there instead was something Vivian recognized from the ER, the controlled urgency of someone moving toward a bad outcome. We've got a problem, Marcus said. He was looking at Lucien, but he was aware of Vivian in the specific way of someone who isn't sure how much to say in front of her. Say it, Lucien said. Reyes just got off with Ortega. The men in her building didn't leave. Marcus's voice was careful and hard. They turned the place over, didn't find anything, and now they're sitting on it. DeLuca knows she wasn't home. He's pulling the surveillance we missed, cameras in the hospital parking structure. How long? Ortega says maybe 2 hours before they pull the right footage. Lucian stood. The movement was quiet and deliberate, the way large machinery is quiet when it starts. And there's something else, Marcus said. A pause. Torres called in from the river location. Someone hit the warehouse 40 minutes ago. Small team, professional. They didn't take anything. He looked at Lucian steadily. They left a message. What message? They left DeLuca's card. His actual card. With his name printed on it. Another pause. And a photograph. Marcus held out his phone. Lucien looked at it and Vivian watched his face, and what moved through it was not fear. It was something colder than fear, something that had been compressed into something smaller and denser over many years. His jaw tightened. His breathing didn't change. He handed the phone back. What is it? Vivian asked. Neither of them answered immediately. What is it? She said again, sharper. Lucien turned to look at her. His eyes moved across her face with that same quality of recognition she'd seen in the lobby, but there was something underneath it now that she hadn't seen before. Something protective, and also something that looked like the first real edge of anger. It's a photograph of you, he said, taken today, outside the hospital. The warmth of the room meant nothing. Vivian felt cold from the inside out. They've been watching me. They've been watching you, he said, for longer than tonight. She thought about the parking structure, the walk to her car in the afternoons when the light was going, the coffee shop she went to on Tuesdays when her shift ended at 6, all the ordinary daily geography of her life. All of it had been watched, catalogued, assessed. They were going to take me, she said. Not a question. They were going to take you and hold you until you gave them what they wanted. But I don't have what they want. I don't know any account numbers. I don't... She stopped. The songs. She looked at Lucien. He was looking back at her, and in his expression she saw the shape of what he hadn't said yet, what he was still deciding whether to say, or how to say it, or whether she was ready to hear it. Tell me, she said. Your father was the most careful man I have ever known, Lucien said. He didn't trust paper. He didn't trust computers. He didn't trust anything that could be found or copied or taken from him by force. He paused. But he trusted you. He trusted you more than he trusted anything or anyone else in his life. Vivian's heartbeat was doing something irregular. The songs, she said. I don't know, he said carefully. I don't know that for certain, but I think... You think he hid it in the songs. I think, Lucien said, that your father may have given you the most valuable thing he had, wrapped inside something he knew you would keep forever, in a place no one could ever search. The blizzard pressed against the 43rd floor windows. Vivian Hale sat in the home of a crime boss she had met 90 minutes ago, with 3 armed men on the other side of various doors, with men in her apartment and men who had photographed her outside her hospital, and a dead father who had apparently sung her the keys to a criminal empire every night before she went to sleep. And she understood, with the particular clarity that comes from being very tired and very afraid at exactly the same moment, that there was no version of tonight that ended with her going home. There was no version of any night, from here forward, that ended with that. The life she had walked out of the hospital with 16 hours ago, the checkbook and the scrubs and the apartment on Fullerton and the patient in Bay 6 and the ordinary, grinding forward motion of a life built on careful, honest effort, that life was gone. She didn't know yet what was on the other side of that, but Lucien Voss was looking at her like he did, and that was Lucien Voss was looking at her like he did, and that was the most frightening part of all. Not his men, not the photograph, not the blizzard or the warehouse or the name Salvatore De Luca sitting in the air between them like something with teeth. The most frightening part was that Lucien looked at her like she was the answer to something, and she didn't yet know what the question was. She stood up. Not because she had somewhere to go, because sitting felt like surrender and she was not ready for that. She walked to the kitchen counter and put both hands flat on the cold stone and breathed, and let herself have 30 seconds of not performing composure for anyone in the room. I need water, she said. Marcus, still near the side door, moved toward the cabinet without being asked. He found a glass, filled it from the tap, set it in front of her without comment. She drank half of it in one motion. "The songs," she said again, setting the glass down. "Walk me through what you think." Lucian came around the table and stood at the counter across from her, not beside her, keeping the distance functional. "Your father ran the accounts entirely from memory. No digital record, no written ledger, nothing that could be subpoenaed or seized or found during a search. That was what made him irreplaceable and what made him a target. DeLuca understood that the moment your father died, the financial architecture of everything my family had built became inaccessible. Because it died with him. That's what DeLuca believed. That's what everyone believed." Lucian's eyes were steady. "Except I found a record in my father's papers, 3 years after your father's death. A single line in a private journal that said, 'Art made provisions.' I never knew what it meant. I looked for a written record, a deposit box, an encrypted file. We looked for 2 years and found nothing. Because it wasn't any of those things. No." Vivian turned the glass on the counter, a slow rotation, thinking. "He started teaching me the songs when I was 6. He said they were from his mother. I believed him completely." She looked up. "They were long. Most lullabies are 8, 12 lines. His were longer. He'd add sections over the years. When I was 10, he added a new verse, said he'd remembered it. When I was 14, another one." She paused. "I thought he was sentimental." "How many songs?" 4, maybe 5 complete ones." She pressed her thumbnail against the edge of the glass. "There's one he sang every single night, never varied. Same words, same order, same melody. I could recite it right now in my sleep." Marcus had gone very still near the door. Lucian said nothing, but the quality of his silence had changed. He was listening with his entire body. "I'm not reciting it," Vivian said. "Not yet. Not until I understand what it means and what happens after." "That's fair." "Don't tell me it's fair like you're grading me. Tell me what happens after." She looked at him directly. "If those songs contain what you think they contain, the accounts, the numbers, whatever it is, what happens to it? What do you do with it?" "We use it to dismantle DeLuca's ability to fund his operations. The accounts are interconnected, his and mine. If we can access the full structure, we can separate them, close the channels he's been using, and cut his financial network out from under him." "And your financial network?" A beat. "We legitimate what can be legitimated," he said. "The rest we dissolve." She stared at him. "You're telling me you're going to go straight." "I'm telling you that 11 years ago I made a decision, and I've been moving toward it since. DeLuca is the last piece of the old structure. If he falls, the reason for most of what my family built falls with him." "That's a very clean story." "It's not clean at all," he said quietly. "Nothing about it is clean. But it's what I'm telling you." She held his gaze for a long moment. He didn't look away. She had spent 6 years in emergency medicine reading people, reading the difference between someone telling her the truth about their pain and someone performing it, reading the face of a person who was actually afraid versus one who wanted her to think they were. It was not a perfect skill. She had been wrong. But she had been wrong less and less over the years, and what she saw in Lucian Voss right now was not performance. That didn't make it safe, but it made it real. "Okay," she said. She didn't elaborate. He didn't ask her to. Lucian turned to Marcus. "I need Reyes to run a full security sweep on the building access points, and I want Chen on the line within the hour." "Chen's in Vancouver." "Then get him on a plane." Marcus nodded once and moved toward the side door again. He was halfway through it when Lucian added, without turning around, "And get Kane up here." The name landed differently than the others. Marcus's shoulders shifted slightly, almost nothing, but Vivian noticed it because she was watching everything now. "Kane's downstairs," Marcus said. "I know where he is. Tell him I need him up here." A pause that was perhaps 1 second longer than it needed to be. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Okay." He left. Vivian filed away the pause the way she filed away everything now. Not sure what it meant, not willing to let go of it. Victor Kane arrived 14 minutes later. Vivian knew his name before he walked in because Lucian had used it, and she had a nurse's habit of mapping names to faces the moment she got them. He was perhaps 45, lean in the way of someone who moved constantly rather than worked out deliberately, with dark eyes that moved across the room in a fast, practiced circuit when he entered. Door, windows, her, Lucian, back to the door. He wore his jacket loose on the left side. She noted that. Victor, Lucian said. He was standing at the windows now, back to the room, looking out at the storm. Sit down. I'm good standing. Kane's voice was light, conversational. He looked at Vivian with something that wasn't quite a smile. This her? This is Vivian Hale, Art's daughter. Kane looked at her for a moment. You look like him. I've been told that, she said. Around the eyes. He said it casually, like a man making small talk. He was a good man, your father. Smart, careful. He paused. Shame about how it ended. There was something wrong with how he said it. Vivian couldn't locate it precisely. It was in the rhythm of the words, the slight flatness beneath the casual surface, the way his eyes moved back to Lucian immediately after, checking something. Lucian had turned from the window. We have a timeline problem. The warehouse hit was a message. DeLuca knows we have her. So we move her, Kane said. Secondary location. I can have a team. No secondary location. Lucian's voice was even. She stays here until we have a full picture of DeLuca's current positioning. I need you coordinating with Ortega on the building surveillance, and I need Chen's read on the financial architecture before we move. Kane nodded slowly. Too slowly, Vivian thought, the nod of someone buying time to calculate. That's a lot of exposure keeping her in one place, he said. I'm aware. If DeLuca figures out she's here, he won't. But if he does... Victor. Lucian's voice didn't rise, but something in it closed down, like a door. I heard you the first time. Kane held up both hands, an easy, open gesture. Just running the angles. That's what you keep me around for. I keep you around for a lot of things, Lucian said. Run the angles on the warehouse footage. I want to know what team DeLuca used and where they came from. Use Ortega's contact at the department if you have to. Sure. Kane looked at Vivian one more time, that almost smile again. Good to finally meet you. He left. Vivian waited until the elevator had closed. I don't like him, she said. Lucian didn't answer immediately. He moved back to the table and sat down, and he looked tired for the first time. Not physically tired, but the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and has been there for years. He's been with me for 8 years, he said. That's not what I said. I know what you said. And? He picked up the file and closed it. Victor Kane is the reason we knew DeLuca was moving on you 6 weeks ago. He was the one who flagged the intelligence. Vivian sat down across from him. She thought about this carefully. He flagged that DeLuca was coming for me. Yes. 6 weeks ago. Yes. And tonight, DeLuca's men were in my apartment, and there was a team at your warehouse, and someone photographed me outside my hospital. She kept her voice level. And Kane's first instinct was to move me to a secondary location. Lucian looked at her. Away from here, she said. Away from you. With a team he controls. The room was very quiet. Something moved through Lucian's face, not fast, but deep, the way a crack moves through something under pressure. He was very still. You noticed the pause, he said. Not a question. When you said his name, Marcus hesitated. Lucian stood up and walked to the window again, and this time when he stood there, she understood. It was not a contemplative posture. He was putting his back to the room so she couldn't read his face while he worked through something that was clearly not new information, but was becoming, in the light of what she'd just said, a different shape than it had been before. If Kane flagged the intelligence, she said carefully, then Kane knew 6 weeks ago that DeLuca was moving on me. Yes. And Kane was the one who recommended the increased security protocols around your warehouse. Yes. The warehouse that was hit tonight. Silence. The hit that drew you out, she said. The window was very dark. The storm was very white against it. Lucien's reflection was barely there, a ghost outline with its hands at its sides. The warehouse attack was a diversion, he said. His voice was quiet and very flat. I came back because I figured that out. But you almost didn't, Vivian said. If you hadn't figured it out, if the diversion had worked, you'd be across the city right now and I'd be here with Victor Kane and a team he controls and no one else. Lucian turned around. His face had changed. The tiredness was gone. What was there instead was something she had not seen on him before. A cold, focused fury, the kind that doesn't raise its voice, the kind that has already done all its feeling and is now simply deciding what to do about the information. He gave DeLuca my location, Vivian said. Not yours, Lucian said. He didn't know you'd be at the Alderton. That was... He stopped. You walked in. That was accident. So he gave DeLuca my apartment. He gave DeLuca your apartment, and the hospital surveillance access, and the warehouse as a diversion. Lucian walked back to the table and put both hands flat on it, a mirror of what Vivian had done in the kitchen 20 minutes ago. For 11 years I kept you safe. For 6 weeks since Kane flagged the intelligence, you've been walking around with a target on you that I put there by trusting the wrong person. Vivian absorbed this. She absorbed it the way she absorbed bad news in the ER, directly, without softening it, because softening it only slowed down the response. Where is he now? She said. Downstairs. Does he know you know? Lucian looked at her. Not yet. Then you have a window. She stood up, a short one, before he reports back that his plan failed. I know how this works. I know you do. I'm thinking out loud. She pushed her hands into the front pocket of her scrubs. If he reports to DeLuca that I'm here and you know about him, DeLuca moves immediately. Everything accelerates. Yes. So we have... She looked at her watch. Almost 4 in the morning. The storm was still at full force outside. How long can you keep Kane in the building without him getting suspicious? Lucian stared at her. You're strategizing. Someone has to. She said it without edge. How long? An hour, maybe less. He'll check in with DeLuca on a schedule. Okay. She breathed in through her nose. Okay. Then here's what I can do. She looked up at him. I can sing you the song. The words sat between them. Right now? He said. Right now, before anything else moves. If the accounts are in there, if my father actually did what you think he did, then you need that information before DeLuca gets another window, before Kane gets to a phone. She held his gaze. And I need you to understand what I'm doing when I give it to you. I'm not giving it to you. I'm using it. There's a difference. I understand the difference. Do you? Yes, he said. You're not a resource. You're a partner, if you choose to be. She looked at him for a long moment. I haven't chosen anything yet, she said, but I'm choosing this. She sat down. He sat across from her. She put her hands in her lap and she looked at the table and she went back, 30 years, to a room with a nightlight and a window and the sound of Chicago traffic and her father's voice, low and unhurried, singing the same song he'd sung the night before and the night before that, every word in the same place, like something he was maintaining, like something he was preserving. She began to sing. Her voice was not a performing voice. It was small and slightly unsteady in the exposed space of the penthouse, and she was aware of how strange it was, this sound in this place, and she kept her eyes on the table and kept going. The melody was simple, the words the same nonsense syllable-adjacent language of half-remembered lullabies, except that as she sang, she began to hear it differently than she ever had before. The rhythm of certain phrases, the way specific syllables clustered, the places where her father had always paused, exactly, before continuing. She stopped after the first verse. Lucien had not moved. He was not recording. He was listening with the same complete attention he'd given her since the lobby, but it was sharper now, more focused. Play it again, he said quietly. She sang it again. He leaned forward. His eyes were doing something, tracking, she realized, processing. The third line, he said. Say it slowly. She said it. He reached for a pen from the file folder and a blank sheet of paper and wrote something down. She watched his handwriting, small, precise, left-leaning. Again, he said. From the beginning. She was on the third pass through the first verse when the elevator opened. Not Reyes. Not Marcus. Victor Kane walked back into the penthouse, with his jacket still loose on the left side and his easy posture and his almost smile, and he stopped when he saw them at the table. Lucien with his pen and his paper, Vivian mid-word, both of them looking up at him. Something crossed his face. Fast, but not fast enough. Forgot my phone, he said. He held it up. It was in his hand. He'd had it in his hand when he arrived. The room understood what that meant before anyone spoke. Victor, Lucien said. Kane's hand moved. Not for his phone. For the left side of his jacket, where he kept something that was not his phone, and he was fast, faster than Vivian would have predicted from a man his age and build. But he had taken one step toward the table, and Lucien was already moving around the table, and the two of them collided in the space between the kitchen and the dining area with a sound that was nothing like what the movies suggested. No elegance, just impact and grappling and the specific horrible sound of two large men who both know what they're doing, trying to do it to each other in a small space. Vivian did not freeze. She pushed back from the table. She was on her feet in one motion, scanning the room with the fast, functional attention of someone who has managed chaos for a living. The lamp beside the couch, a heavy brass floor lamp, the kind with a weighted base. She had her hands around the base before she'd fully decided to cross the room. Kane had gotten space. Not much, but enough. Lucien had his wrist, the gun hand, wrenched sideways and up, but Kane was using his body weight to drive them both toward the window, and there was a table in the path, and the physics of it were going badly. Vivian moved. She came from Kane's left, which was the side he wasn't protecting, and she brought the base of the lamp across the back of his right knee. Not a strike aimed at damage, but at destabilization, the way you'd take down a standing structure, and his leg buckled, and in the half-second that he had to compensate for that, Lucien drove his elbow into Kane's jaw with enough force that the sound of it made Vivian's back teeth ache. Kane went down. Not unconscious. He was on his knees, one hand on the floor, the gun somewhere under the couch where it had skidded, his jaw working sideways like he was testing whether it still functioned. Lucien stood over him. His breathing was elevated. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there a minute ago, and blood was moving down along his temple with calm indifference to everything else happening in the room. Vivian still had the lamp. Kane looked up at her. His eyes moved to the lamp and back to her face, and something in his expression shifted. Reassessment, she thought. He had expected to find a nurse. "Sit down on the floor," she said. "Put your hands where I can see them." He didn't move. "Victor." Her voice was level. 14 hours into a shift, family meeting she hadn't been prepared for, blizzard and armed men, and now this, and her voice was level. "I have been awake for 18 hours. 3 men broke into my apartment tonight, and I have had an extremely bad evening. Sit down." He sat down. Lucien was already on his phone, 2 words into a call that brought Marcus through the side door in under 90 seconds. And then there were more people in the room, and the situation was being handled in the efficient, wordless way of people who had handled situations before. And Vivian set the lamp down against the wall and stood back and let it happen. Her hands were shaking, not visibly. She had closed them into loose fists and held them against her thighs. And from the outside, she probably looked calm, but her hands were shaking the way they had shaken the first time she'd worked a code, and they were shaking for the same reason. Not fear, not weakness, but the body's honest accounting of what it had just done and what it had cost. Lucien looked at her across the room. His face was bleeding and his tie was somewhere on the floor, and he looked nothing like the composed, untouchable man from the hotel lobby. He looked like a person who had just been in a fight, which he had. "You hit him with a lamp," he said. "I destabilized his foundation." In a very specific way. "I used to play a lot of chess," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. He looked at her for another moment, and in the middle of everything, the man on the floor, the blood on his own face, the 4:30 in the morning, and the storm, and the city below them that had no idea any of this was happening, something moved through his expression that she couldn't entirely identify and wasn't sure she should. Kane was sitting on the floor with Marcus behind him and Reyes covering the room, and he was looking at Vivian now with an expression that had moved past reassessment into something that was almost, she thought, respect, which was its own specific kind of horrible, coming from a man who had spent 6 weeks helping engineer her kidnapping. "How long?" Lucien asked. Kane looked at the floor. "Victor, how long have you been working with DeLuca?" A long pause, the kind that answers the question before the words do. 3 years, Kane said. The room went very still. Lucien's face didn't change. That was the frightening part. The complete absence of visible reaction, like he had known and been preparing for this, and was now simply receiving confirmation of something he had already processed. 3 years, he said. "Yeah. The Hernandez job." Kane said nothing. "The Hernandez job was you." Lucien's voice was still quiet, still level. 3 men died on that job. I spent 8 months trying to figure out the leak. I know. Look at me. Kane looked up. Tell me what DeLuca offered you. Another pause. Kane's jaw was swelling now, beginning to close slightly on the left side. He looked like a man doing the arithmetic of his remaining options and not finding the numbers encouraging. Control, he said, of the West Side operations after you were gone. Money, autonomy. He paused. He told me you were already dead, that it was just a matter of timing, that staying with you was staying on a sinking— Stop, Lucian said. Kane stopped. Does DeLuca know where we are? Not yet. I hadn't checked in. What's the check-in schedule? 5 a.m. Lucian looked at Marcus. Something passed between them that Vivian couldn't read, but that Marcus clearly could, because he nodded once and pulled Kane to his feet by the back of his collar, with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Put him in the East Room, Lucian said. Nothing in there he can use, and get Chen on the line regardless of the hour. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning in Vancouver, I need him now. They took Kane through the side door. The room became quiet again with the specific quality of a room that has just had something violent happen in it and is now pretending to be a regular room again. Vivian picked up the lamp and set it back beside the couch, where it had come from. She straightened it. The base had a small dent now. She looked at it for a moment. Her father had said once, when she was about 11 and she'd gotten into a fight at school, not a physical fight, a social one, the kind that leaves no visible marks and hurts far longer. He had sat across from her at the kitchen table and said, "The most important thing is not how fast you move when something happens. It's what you think to pick up." She had not understood what he meant until approximately 45 minutes ago. Lucien appeared beside her with a cloth pressed against the cut above his eye. He held out a glass of water. She took it. He said 3 years, she said. Yes. And you had no idea. I had— He stopped, pressed the cloth more firmly. I had suspicions. Nothing I could confirm. Kane was good at being trustworthy. Until he wasn't. Until he wasn't. He exhaled. 3 years of decisions made with compromised information. Operations he knew about. People he could have given up. He looked at the window. I need to know how deep it goes. Whether anyone else— Lucienne. He looked at her. You're bleeding, she said. He touched the cloth, looked at it. It's not bad. I know it's not bad. I'm a nurse. I can see it's not bad. Let me look at it anyway. He stood there for a moment with the slightly lost expression of someone who has been managing everything for so long that being managed catches them entirely off guard. Then he sat down at the table. She found the first aid kit in the kitchen on the third cabinet she tried. She had a sense for where practical things lived in rooms, developed over years of navigating unfamiliar spaces at speed. She sat across from him and opened it and worked. The cut was a split from the edge of a surface, clean, not deep, the kind that bleeds dramatically and heals without a scar if it's closed properly. She cleaned it and closed it with 2 strips, and she worked efficiently, not gently but not roughly, and she was aware of how close she was to him and how he did not move. The song, she said while she worked. How much did you get? Enough to know your father was a genius, and I'm going to need 3 hours with a cryptographer to unpack the rest. He paused. There were account numbers in the third line. I recognized the format, offshore structure. How many? I counted 6 before Kane came back. She smoothed the second strip into place and sat back. There are 9 verses in that song. Lucian looked at her. And 4 more songs after it, she said. The expression on his face was something she would think about later, in a quieter moment that was still a long way off. It was not triumph. It was not relief. It was the face of a man who had carried a loss for 11 years and was only now beginning to understand that the thing he'd lost had been waiting for him all along, safe inside something no one would ever have thought to look. We need to start over, he said, from the beginning of the first song. I know, she said, and we have— He looked at his watch. 53 minutes before Kane's check-in window with DeLuca closes, and DeLuca knows something went wrong. Then we'd better move fast. She reached across the table and took the pen and paper from where they'd been left when everything had stopped, and she found the place in the first verse where she'd been interrupted, and she began again. Outside, the blizzard pressed against the glass. The city below was still dark, still buried, still entirely unaware of the woman on the 43rd floor singing her dead father's lullabies into the pre-dawn silence, while the man across from her wrote down numbers that were about to dismantle an empire. And the clock moved toward 5 a.m. with the indifference of all clocks. And somewhere below them, in a locked room, Victor Kane sat with his swelling jaw and his 3 years of betrayal, and the dawning comprehension that he had catastrophically, Victor Kane sat with his swelling jaw and his 3 years of betrayal, and the dawning comprehension that he had catastrophically miscalculated which side was going to win. Vivian did not look at the East Room door when she thought about this. She looked at the paper in front of her, at the numbers Lucian had written in his small, precise hand, and she kept singing. The second verse took 11 minutes. Not because it was long, but because Lucian stopped her 4 times, asked her to repeat specific phrases, wrote things down in a shorthand she couldn't read, crossed things out, rewrote them. He worked the way she imagined her father had worked, methodically, without rushing, without letting the clock on the wall become a pressure he performed in front of. She could feel the clock anyway. Both of them could. "Third verse," he said. She sang the third verse. His pen moved faster this time. She watched his face while she sang and saw the moment a pattern resolved for him, a slight release around his eyes, a breath taken and let go. The expression of someone who has been decoding something and has just found the key. "Your father," he said quietly, not stopping his writing, "built a nested structure. The melody carries the sequence. The words carry the values. You have to have both to reconstruct the account strings." He paused. "Without the melody, the words are nonsense. Without the words, the melody is just a song." He made it so it couldn't be written down and still work. You'd have to sing it every time, exactly as he taught you. She thought about that, about her father sitting on the edge of her bed, correcting her when she got a word wrong, patient and careful, saying, "No, sweetheart, it goes like this." She had thought he was particular about the lyrics. She had thought he just loved the song. "He was protecting me," she said, "by keeping it inside me, because if I didn't know what it was, I couldn't be pressured to give it up." "You also couldn't be killed for it," Lucian said. "DeLuca would need you alive and cooperative, not just alive." She sat with that. "Fourth verse," he said. She was halfway through the 4th verse when Marcus came through the side door. His face was the same controlled surface it always was, but his eyes went straight to Lucian and stayed there. "We have a problem," he said. Lucian looked up. "Kane?" Kane's phone had a secondary check-in, automated, built into an app that looks like a weather tracker. Marcus set the phone on the table. It pinged at 4:45. If someone on DeLuca's end is monitoring the responses, they know the check-in failed. Vivian stopped singing. The silence in the room had a different texture now. "How long ago was 4:45? Lucian said. 18 minutes. Lucian stood. "Options. We move her. Secondary." "No secondary location," Vivian said. Both men looked at her. "You move me, we lose the songs. I'm not singing these in a car or a safe house with people coming through the doors. I need to finish." She looked at Lucian. "How much do you have?" "Enough to start, not enough to finish." "How many more verses do you need?" "All of them. The nested structure means each verse validates the previous one. If I'm missing even one section, the strings won't resolve." She looked at the paper. 2 full songs documented, 2.5 songs remaining. "How long?" she said. He did the arithmetic in his head. 90 minutes, if we don't stop." "Then give me 90 minutes, she said. She looked at Marcus. "What can you do with 18 minutes? Marcus looked at Lucian. Something passed between them. "I can harden the building access," Marcus said. 2 teams on the parking structure, 1 on the service entrance. We've got the elevator codes locked, but DeLuca's people will have a workaround inside 40 minutes if they're serious." "They're serious," Lucian said. "I know they are." Marcus moved back toward the door. "I'll get on it. Get Reyes and Carver on the roof access. And tell Chen I need him on a live line in 10 minutes, regardless of where we are in the process." Marcus was already gone. Lucian sat back down. He looked at her across the table, and she looked at him, and neither of them acknowledged what they both understood, which was that the 90 minutes they needed and the 40 minutes they probably had were not the same number. "Keep going," he said. She kept going. She sang the 4th verse through twice, and the fifth verse through 3 times because the fifth verse was where the structure became genuinely complex. Her father had embedded a secondary rhythm inside the primary melody, a counter pattern that Lucian kept having to stop and recalibrate for. And at one point, he set his pen down and pressed both hands flat against the table and breathed for 5 seconds before picking the pen back up, and she did not comment on this. It was 5:23 in the morning. She was on the first verse of the third song when the lights went out. Not all of them. The building had backup generators and they caught within 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds were enough. Enough for her heart to seize, enough for Lucian to be on his feet and his phone in his hand before the emergency lighting came on in its cold, flat, inadequate way. The phone buzzed. He looked at it. Marcus. She heard Marcus's voice from where she was sitting. They cut the external power feed to the building. We've got generator, but they'll know that too. Parking structure. We've got visual on 2 vehicles. Minimum 6 people. Armed? What do you think? How are they getting in? Not through the front. We've got the lobby covered. East Service Corridor. I've got Reyes there, but he's one man, and if they split the team, split Carver. Put 2 on the East Corridor. That leaves the roof. I'll handle the roof. Lucian, Marcus. His voice dropped into that register that ended conversations. I'll handle the roof. You handle the East Corridor. Give me 10 minutes. He ended the call. He looked at Vivian. How much do you have left? 2.5 songs. Time to sing them in sequence, no stopping. She thought about it. Maybe 45 minutes. I need to go to the roof. I know. I'm going to leave you with, don't leave me with anyone, she said. Every person you leave here is a person you don't have downstairs. Vivian, I cannot leave you alone in this room. I was alone in an ER at 3 in the morning with a patient trying to pull his own IV out, she said. I'll manage. She picked up the pen he'd been using and pulled a blank sheet from the folder. Teach me the shorthand. He stared at her. The notation you've been using, the way you're writing the account strings. Teach me how to do it in the next 5 minutes and then go to the roof, and I'll keep writing while you're gone. She held out the pen. Or we sit here and wait for DeLuca's people to come through the East Corridor and none of this matters. Another 3 seconds. She counted them. He sat back down. He pulled the paper toward him, and for 5 minutes, fast and precise, he walked her through the notation system, the brackets, the number sequencing, the way the melody intervals mapped to digit clusters. She wrote it down. She asked 2 questions. She got 2 answers. She understood both. It's not perfect, he said. I'm a nurse. I document under pressure for a living. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he stood, and he moved to the steel cabinet and used his key, and he removed something and put it in his jacket, and she did not ask what it was because she already knew. He crossed to the elevator. He stopped. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me or Marcus, he said, don't try to negotiate. Get into the kitchen, stay low, and use anything in the room. I already know what I'd use, she said. He looked at the lamp, then back at her. Don't finish without me, he said. Then move fast, she said. The elevator closed. She turned back to the paper and she began to sing. Alone in the penthouse of a man she had met 7 hours ago, 43 floors above a city buried in snow, with the emergency lighting casting. Everything in the flat white of a room that has forgotten what warmth looks like. Vivian Hale sang her father's songs and wrote down numbers and tried not to count the seconds. She got through the 3rd song in 22 minutes. She was into the 4th song, the longest one, the one her father had always sung last and slowly, when she heard the sound from somewhere below. Not a gunshot, but something structural, something that moved through the building's frame the way sound travels through bone rather than air. She kept singing. Her voice did not waver. She made it not waver by a specific act of will that cost her something, some reserve she would not fully account for until later. She was on the 2nd verse of the 4th song when the side door opened. Not Marcus, not Reyes, not anyone she recognized. 2 men, moving fast and low, the specific economy of motion of people who have breached rooms before. The first one cleared the doorway left, the second went right, and they were professionals enough that they had identified her and assessed the space in under 2 seconds. The first one's gun came up. Stop, he said. Just that. His voice had an accent she placed immediately. Not Chicago, not Midwest, somewhere further south, further east. Vivian stopped singing. Her hands were flat on the table. The paper was in front of her. 2 complete songs and most of a third, documented in Lucian's shorthand, sat on the table between her and the man with the gun. The second man moved toward the table. She moved before he reached it. Not toward the paper, not toward the door, but sideways, to her left, to the kitchen counter, and she had the glass from earlier in her hand and she threw it at the first man's face, not aiming to hit him, but aiming to make him move, to interrupt the stillness of the standoff for the half-second she needed. He moved. The second man grabbed her arm. She let him, because fighting the grip was slower than using it. She turned into him rather than away, the way her father had taught her in the backyard when she was 13 and she'd thought they were playing a game. And the base of her palm connected with the underside of his jaw, and his teeth came together hard enough that she felt it in her wrist. He didn't go down. He was too big and too trained for that. But he staggered, and that gave her the counter, and she was already moving toward the kitchen island when the first man came around the table and the gun was in his hand, and the elevator opened. What happened in the next 4 seconds was not something Vivian could fully reconstruct afterward. She was behind the kitchen island, the second man was between her and the elevator. The first man was between her and the window, and there was a collision of forces that involved Lucian coming through the elevator fast and low, and Marcus coming through the side door from the other direction simultaneously, and the noise in the room was enormous for approximately 4 seconds. And then it was over. Both men were on the floor. Lucien was bleeding again. A different place this time. His left hand, something had caught his left hand. He was holding it against his body with his right, and she could see from across the kitchen that it needed attention. He looked at her. "You're okay," he said. It was not quite a question. "The second song is mostly done," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was very proud of that. "I got through this 4th song first verse before they came in." He looked at the table, at the papers, at her handwriting mixed with his on the sheets she'd been working on alone. "You kept writing," he said. "You told me not to stop." He crossed the kitchen to her. He looked at the papers over her shoulder. His left hand was dripping onto the floor, and he was not acknowledging it, and she turned and took his wrist, not gently, and looked at the cut. "Sit," she said. "We don't have time. If you bleed out on this floor, we definitely don't have time. Sit down and give me 90 seconds. He sat. She used the first aid kit for the second time that night, this time on a laceration that was deeper and needed pressure and would need proper stitching before morning, but could be managed temporarily by someone who knew what she was doing, which she did. Marcus was on his radio. She could hear him talking in the fast, clipped language of someone coordinating multiple positions at once, and underneath his voice she could hear, distantly, the sound of the storm which was still happening, which had been happening this entire time, indifferent to all of it. "Chen," Lucian said. "He's on a live line," Marcus said. "I've been feeding him the numbers as you document them." Lucian's head came up. "Without telling me." "You were on the roof." Marcus held his gaze. "And she was documenting. I made a call." A moment in which Lucian assessed this and then let it go. "How much has Chen seen?" "Song 1, Song 2, most of Song 3. He says the structure is..." Marcus checked his radio. He says, and I'm quoting, "Whoever built this is either a lunatic or the most elegant financial architect he has ever encountered." "My father," Vivian said, smoothing the last strip of closure across Lucian's palm, "would have been very pleased to hear that." "How much is left?" Lucian said. "Second half of Song 4, all of Song 5. 30 minutes? If we don't get interrupted again." He looked at Marcus. "I've got 4 more teams inbound," Marcus said. 12 minutes. We can hold the building until then." He paused. "DeLuca's not here yet. These were an advance team." The words settled like something dropped into still water. "He's coming himself," Lucian said. "That's what it looks like, Salvatore DeLuca, in person, to the building where they were sitting." Vivian absorbed this information the way she was absorbing everything tonight, directly, without cushion, because the cushion was a luxury she had run out of somewhere around hour 17. "Then we finish before he gets here," she said. She sat back down. She picked up the pen. She looked at Lucian. "Are you with me or not?" His left hand was wrapped. His face was still bleeding slightly from the earlier cut. He had been on a roof in a blizzard 40 minutes ago, and his oldest lieutenant was in a locked room 3 doors down, and the man who had murdered her father was driving toward them through a snowstorm with unknown numbers of armed people. I'm with you, he said. He sat down across from her. He picked up his own pen. She began to sing. The fourth song's second half was the most complex thing her father had ever taught her. She had always felt it when she sang it, a density to it, a layered quality, like it had more information in it than a song that length should be able to carry. Now she understood why. She moved through it slowly, deliberately, stopping when Lucian needed her to stop, repeating when he asked, watching his shorthand move across the paper in the flat white emergency light. They were 3/4 through when Marcus's radio went. He listened. His face did not change. He looked at Lucian. DeLuca's in the building. Lucian's pen didn't stop. Level? Parking structure. He's got... Marcus lowered his voice. 9 people with him, not including drivers. That's a war party, Vivian said. Yes, Lucian said, still writing. It is. He came here to end it, she said, tonight. He came here because Kane's check-in failed and his advance team didn't report back, and he's been waiting 11 years for this particular resolution. Lucian looked up from the paper. He thinks he's cornered us. Are we cornered? He held her gaze. We will be if we don't finish. She turned back to the song. Her voice was getting tired, not disappearing, but showing its edges, the slight roughness that comes from sustained use in a body that hasn't slept in 19 hours. She pushed through it. The last verse of Song 4 took 11 minutes. Song 5 began. Her father's final song. The one he'd always saved for last, sung quietly, almost under his breath, like it was something private even between the two of them. She had always loved it most of all the songs because it sounded nothing like a code. It sounded like something genuine, but slow and a little sad and full of the specific tenderness of someone who loves a person more than they can say directly. She understood now why it sounded that way. He had made the most important one beautiful, so she would keep it. So it would live in her not as a task, but as a comfort. So even if everything else went wrong, she would still be carrying this particular thing inside her because she loved it. Her throat tightened. She did not stop singing. From somewhere below them, not adjacent, not close yet, but coming, she could hear the building itself responding to the presence of people moving through it with purpose. The structural hum of elevators being engaged, the distant percussion of coordinated movement. DeLuca was ascending. Lucienne heard it too. She could see it in the slight shift of his posture, the way his pen moved slightly faster without his face showing anything. Keep going, he said. She kept going. The 5th song had 6 verses. She was through 3 of them. 4. Marcus was coordinating quietly near the side door, his voice low and constant, pulling and deploying people she couldn't see through positions she couldn't visualize. The management of a defense operation happening in the background of a lullaby that her dead father had given her 30 years ago, for exactly this moment. 5 verses. The 6th verse was the last one. The last thing her father had ever taught her. She had not sung it out loud to another person in 12 years. She was 2 lines from the end of the 6th verse when the elevator light came on. Not their elevator. The service elevator at the far end of the penthouse. The one she hadn't known was there. The one that didn't require the floor code because it was a freight access. The one that DeLuca's people had apparently known about, and Marcus's people had not covered because nobody had thought. The doors opened, and Salvatore DeLuca walked in. He was smaller than she'd imagined. That was the first thing. She had built him in her mind from 11 years of absence into something enormous, and she had been wrong. He was compact, perhaps 60, silver-haired, with the careful grooming of a man who has spent decades making himself look like a person no one should be afraid of. He wore a dark overcoat, no visible weapon, though 4 men came in behind him with weapons visible enough for everyone. He looked at the room. He looked at Lucienne. His eyes moved to the paper on the table, to Vivian's handwriting, to the sheets of documented account strings, and something in his face became very still. I'm late, he said. His voice was conversational, slightly rueful, like a man arriving after the party started. A little, Lucian said. He hadn't moved. His pen was still in his hand. His left hand, wrapped and bleeding slightly through the bandage Vivian had applied, rested on the table. DeLuca's eyes moved to Vivian. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything, as a calculation, an assessment, a variable being plugged into an equation. You look like your father, he said. I've been hearing that a lot tonight, she said. He almost smiled. Art was a brilliant man, I respected him. He paused. I want you to know that what happened to him was not personal. The room was very quiet. Vivian looked at him across the table and the papers and the 2.5 songs worth of account strings that her father had carried to his death and that she had carried in her sleep for 30 years without knowing it, and she said, "He sat in a room for 2 weeks and didn't say a word." I know. And you're telling me it wasn't personal? DeLuca's eyes moved to the papers again. His 4 men were positioned around the room with the practiced geometry of people who knew what they were doing. Marcus was near the side door. Lucien was still and present across the table. The situation was balanced in the specific way of something about to tip. "I'm not here to negotiate," DeLuca said to Lucien. "I'm here because it's been 11 years and I'm tired of waiting. Whatever she's documented, whatever your cryptographer has on the line." He stopped. His eyes sharpened. "Chen, you got Chen on a live feed." 12 minutes ago, Lucien said. Something flickered through DeLuca's composure. "Shut it down." "I can't shut it down. It's already transmitted." "Then what are we doing here?" DeLuca said, and for the first time the conversational ease cracked slightly, showing something harder underneath. "What are you... You've already sent it? You've already..." "Not all of it," Vivian said. Both men looked at her. She put her pen down. She folded her hands on the table, her father's gesture, the one she'd inherited without knowing it until right now. "There are 2 lines left, the last 2 lines of the last song. Without them, the string for the master account is incomplete." She held DeLuca's gaze. "You can't access anything without the complete string, and the only person who knows the last 2 lines is me." The room understood what she had just done. DeLuca understood it first. She watched him understand it, the slight compression of his lips, the recalibration happening behind his eyes. She had just made herself indispensable. She had just taken the variable he'd spent 11 years trying to possess and turned it into a condition. "So," she said, and her voice was very calm, "let's talk about what happens next." Lucien's hand had closed around the pen on the table. DeLuca looked at her with the expression of a man who has spent 40 years knowing how these moments end and is encountering, for the first time, the possibility that this one might. DeLuca looked at her with the expression of a man who has spent 40 years knowing how these moments end and is encountering, for the first time, the possibility that this one might not end the way he planned. That pause, the one that lived between his last word and whatever came next, was perhaps 2 seconds long. It felt like something geological. Then he said, to the man on his left, "Take the papers." The man moved toward the table. Lucien moved at the same time, and what followed was not cinematic. It was not clean. It was 4 men with weapons in a room with a table between them, and 2 people who had decided, independently and without coordination, that they were not going to let the papers leave the room. Vivian grabbed the sheets closest to her and pulled them off the table and stepped backward toward the kitchen in the same motion. The man coming for the papers changed direction toward her. She put the kitchen island between them, which bought her approximately 2 seconds, and she used both of them. She folded the papers in half and shoved them into the front pocket of her scrubs, against her body, the most protected place she had available. The man reached across the island and grabbed her wrist. She did not fight the grab. She dropped her weight instead, letting her knees bend, making herself suddenly and completely heavy, the way her father had taught her when she was 14 and thought they were playing a wrestling game on the living room floor. The man's grip pulled, overcorrected, and she came up and forward, and the heel of her free hand connected with his nose in a strike that was not gentle and was not meant to be. He let go. Blood. His, not hers. It hit the counter in the front of her scrubs, and she registered it with the clinical detachment of someone who has been covered in other people's blood as a professional condition of employment and did not stop moving. Across the room, things were happening that she could not fully track. Lucien had put the table between himself and DeLuca's other 3 men, which slowed the geometry of the approach, and Marcus had come through the side door at a run the moment. The first man had moved for the papers, and there were bodies and noise and the specific terrible percussion of a room in which multiple people are doing violence simultaneously. DeLuca himself had not moved from the spot where he'd entered. That was what Vivian noticed, pulling back against the far kitchen wall with the papers against her chest and her wrist aching and someone else's blood on her scrubs. DeLuca had not moved. He was watching the room the way a man watches a fire he started, with attention and without panic, calculating what it would consume and what it would spare. His eyes found her across the room. He walked toward her. Not fast. Not with the aggressive urgency of the men working around him. He walked the way a man walks when he has decided something and does not need to hurry anymore, because the decision has already been made and everything else is just execution. Vivian had nothing left in the kitchen she hadn't already used or considered. The lamp was in the other room. The glass was broken on the floor. The first aid kit was open on the counter to her left and contained nothing useful against a man of his particular kind of determination. She stayed where she was. She met his eyes. He stopped approximately 4 feet from her, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the specific quality of his stillness. Not the stillness of a man at peace, but the stillness of a man who has spent decades compressing everything internal into something small and very dense. "Give me the papers," he said. "No," she said. "They won't help you. They're not for me." "Your father," he started. "Don't," she said. "Don't tell me about my father. You don't get to tell me anything about my father." His jaw moved. "He made choices. So did you. I want what's mine." "None of it is yours," she said. "You didn't build it. You didn't memorize it. You didn't sit in a room for 2 weeks and not say a word to protect it." Her voice was not shaking. She was distantly amazed by this. "You just want it. That's not the same thing." Something moved through DeLuca's face. Not quite anger, not quite respect. Something that sat between them uncomfortably. "You're very much like him," he said. "I know," she said. He reached for her arm. She heard the shot before she understood it. Not at her, not at DeLuca. The sound came from the right side of the room, and it was followed immediately by the specific silence that follows a gunshot in an enclosed space, the moment where everyone's body is processing what happened before the brain catches up. DeLuca's hand had stopped 3 inches from her arm. He turned. Lucien was standing near the overturned table, one of DeLuca's men on the floor behind him, his right hand extended. He had fired once, into the wall 6 inches above DeLuca's head. His left hand, still bandaged, was bleeding through the wrap again. His face was the face of someone who has made a decision they have been moving toward for 11 years and have finally arrived at, and the arriving feels nothing like they expected. "It's done, Sal," he said. His voice was very quiet. Quieter than the room deserved. "Chen has the architecture. Your accounts and mine fully mapped. By the time your lawyers are awake this morning, every channel you run through the Voss network will be frozen." DeLuca's 2 remaining standing men looked at each other. "Tell them to put them down," Lucien said. A pause. "Sal?" DeLuca made a small gesture with his right hand. Not surrender. More like a man setting something down he has been carrying too long and has decided, finally, is not worth the weight. The 2 men lowered their weapons. Marcus was there immediately, and Reyes came through the side door with 2 more men Vivian didn't recognize, and the room reorganized itself around the new reality with the speed of people who have trained for exactly this outcome. DeLuca turned back to Vivian. His face, she thought, looked older than it had 3 minutes ago. Not weaker. Older. The particular aging that happens when something a person has been sustaining through effort finally stops being sustained. "The last 2 lines," he said. "Are already gone," she said. "I sang them to Chen's line while you were walking across the room." He looked at her. She held his gaze. "When?" he said. "When you were 6 feet away and moving slowly because you wanted me to be afraid of you," she said. "I had 40 seconds. 40 seconds was enough." The room's very quiet. DeLuca looked at her for a long moment, and in his expression she found something she had not expected. Something that was not rage, not calculation, but a kind of terminal recognition. The expression of a man looking at the shape of his own defeat and finding it, despite everything, comprehensible. "Art taught you well," he said. He said it like a man closing a book. "He taught me everything," she said. "You just didn't know what everything meant." DeLuca was taken by Marcus and Reyes and 2 other men she didn't know, through the side door, quietly, without the theatrics of someone being arrested and with the specific efficiency of an outcome that had been a long time coming. His remaining men went with him. The room, which had contained a great deal of violence in the last 20 minutes, became suddenly and almost absurdly still. Vivian stood in the kitchen with someone else's blood on her scrubs and her father's songs in her chest and the papers folded against her body. She breathed. Just that, for a moment. Just breathed. Lucien came to the kitchen. He was moving carefully. The left hand, she could see, had taken more damage than the earlier laceration accounted for, and there was something in the way he was holding his right shoulder that suggested the collision near the overturned table had cost him. He stopped at the island and put his right hand on it. They looked at each other across the kitchen, across the debris of a night that had started with a blizzard and a hotel lobby and a collision that was either the worst luck of her life or the only luck that had ever mattered. "Chen got it," he said. "All of it." "I know, I was there." It's going to take him 48 hours to fully map the structure and begin the separation process. DeLuca's financial networks won't collapse overnight. But they'll collapse. "Yes," he said, "they'll collapse." She nodded once. She took the papers from her pocket, unfolded them, smoothed them against the counter. Her handwriting and his interleaved. The record of her father's life's work documented in an hour by his daughter and the son of the man he'd served, in a penthouse in a blizzard while men tried to take it from them. Her father would have found this, she thought, both completely ridiculous and entirely appropriate. "Sit down," she said to Lucien. "I'm fine." "You're absolutely not fine. Sit down." He sat. She got the first aid kit for the third time, and she worked on his hand properly this time. Not the emergency management of earlier, but the careful, methodical work of someone who intended it to hold. She cleaned and packed and wrapped, and he sat without complaint, which told her the hand hurt more than he was showing. "The shoulder," she said when she'd finished the hand. "It's fine." "Lucien." He looked at her. "The shoulder," she said again. He moved it carefully, winced. "Probably bruised, not broken. Probably isn't a medical assessment. Are you billing me for this?" "When I figure out your insurance situation," she said. "Absolutely." He almost smiled. The almost was enough. She stepped back and looked at him. The cut above his eye from earlier, properly closed now but bruised around it. The hand. The shoulder. The general condition of a man who had been through a very great deal in the past 4 hours and was still upright through some combination of will and the specific stubbornness of people who have been upright through worse. "What happens to Kane?" she said. Lucien's expression shifted. "He'll be questioned. Whatever information he has about DeLuca's remaining operations, we'll use it." He paused. "After that, there are people whose job it is to handle outcomes like Victor Kane. Are you one of those people?" "Not tonight." She accepted this. "And DeLuca?" "His lawyers will hear from certain federal contacts by morning. The financial architecture gives them enough to build a case that doesn't require any of my people to testify." He looked at the table. "It'll take time, but it'll hold." "Your father's empire," she said. "The legitimate restructuring. Is that actually possible, or is it something you say?" He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that considers rather than deflects. "I've been moving money out of the old channels for 6 years. Investments, real estate, a foundation that actually functions. The dirty side. It's smaller than it looks from outside. DeLuca's operation is what it looks like. Mine isn't anymore." He paused. "But I won't tell you it's clean. It's not clean. It's just in process." "In process?" she said. "Yes. That's honest. I'm trying to be." She looked at the window. Outside, the blizzard was doing something different than it had been. The white against the glass had softened, still present, still substantial, but changed in character, the way a storm changes when it has decided to end, and is beginning the long work of becoming weather rather than catastrophe. Dawn was not here yet, but it was thinking about it. "My apartment," she said. "We'll have people clear it today. Make sure it's—" "I can't go back there," she said. Not with grief or drama, just as a fact, acknowledged and set down. "Not to live. It's not— I can't go back to that and pretend the last 12 hours didn't happen. I couldn't pretend before I knew what I know, and now—" She stopped. "No," he said. "You can't." She turned from the window. "What did my father's promise actually say? The exact thing." Lucien looked at her steadily. He said, "Keep her safe and keep her far from this. Let her be ordinary if ordinary is what she wants. And if the day comes when she can't be ordinary anymore—" He paused. He said, "Trust her." He said that specifically. Trust her to know what to do. Vivian was quiet. "He trusted you," she said. "He trusted you," Lucien said. "He was talking about you." He told my father that his daughter was the most capable person he'd ever produced, and the best thing he'd ever done, and that if the world ever pushed her to the edge, to trust her to know how to push back. He held her gaze. He was right. She didn't have a response to that, not because she didn't feel it, but because what she felt was too large for the words available at 5:47 in the morning after 19 hours awake, and a blizzard and 4 songs and a kitchen fight, and a man who had looked at her like her father's ghost come back to settle accounts. She sat down at the table, not across from Lucien this time, beside him. The papers were between them, the account strings, the nested codes, the entire financial map of an empire built in secret and dismantled in an hour by a song. She looked at her father's ghost on those pages. Not his face, not his voice, but his mind, his particular way of solving problems that no one else would have thought to solve that way. He had seen the danger coming years before it arrived, and he had prepared for it the only way that was completely unassailable. He had given it to his daughter, not as a burden, as a trust. He knew I'd figure it out, she said, eventually, when I had to. He knew, Lucien said. He told my father, when the time comes, she'll understand. He didn't say if. She looked at the table. He should have told me. Yes. He should have trusted me with it earlier. I was an adult. I could have handled it. Yes, Lucien said again. No qualification, no softening, just agreement. He didn't tell me because he wanted me to have a life that wasn't this. She gestured at the room, the papers, the first aid kit, the general wreckage of the night. He wanted me to be a nurse and live on Fullerton and balance my checkbook by hand and never know any of this existed. Yes. And that was his choice to make, not mine. She breathed in. But he also made sure that when I couldn't be that person anymore, I would have what I needed to be whoever came next. She looked at her hands on the table. That's a very complicated kind of love. Lucien said nothing. He was watching her with the same quality of attention he'd had since the lobby. Not possessive, not clinical, but the attention of someone who understands that what they're watching matters and doesn't want to look away from it. What did you expect, she said, when you found me? In the lobby. What did you think was going to happen after that? He thought about it for a moment. I thought I'd get you somewhere safe. Explain enough to keep you calm. Hand you off to someone I trusted and spend the night dealing with DeLuca from a position of better information than I'd had an hour before. Hand me off to someone. Yes. And instead, he said, you turned out to be the thing I'd been missing for 11 years and also entirely capable of defending yourself with a lamp, and my plans didn't survive the first 30 minutes. Most plans don't, she said, not the ones that actually matter. She looked at him. He looked back. Outside the window, the storm was letting go of itself 1 degree at a time, and the city below was beginning the process of becoming itself again after a night of burial, and somewhere in it, in a locked room in a building in a precinct that would be receiving calls within the hour, the wheels of an outcome 11 years in the making were beginning to turn. The financial restructuring, she said, the legitimate businesses. You said you'd been building it for 6 years. Yes. You need a financial architect. He was very still. Someone who can manage the separation, the clean channels from the dirty ones, the investments that can be legitimized from the ones that have to be dissolved. She held his gaze. Someone who understands the account structure completely, from the inside, because they spent a night singing it into existence. Vivian, I'm not going back to Fullerton, she said, and I'm not walking away from this. My father spent his life managing money that built things that hurt people, and he carried that alone, and he died for it alone. She put her hand flat on the papers between them. I'm not interested in repeating his mistakes, but I'm also not interested in walking away from what he built just because it was built badly. This is not a safe position to be in, Lucien said. I was safe for 31 years, she said. How'd that work out? His jaw shifted. I'm a nurse, she said. I know how to manage complex systems under pressure. I know how to document and track and make decisions when everything is moving wrong. I know what it means to keep something alive that wants to fail. She looked at him steadily. And I have my father's entire financial architecture in my memory. Not just the songs. Everything he taught me that I didn't know he was teaching me. She paused. All those bedtime lessons dressed up as games. He didn't just give me the codes. He gave me the principles, the way he thought. the way the structure worked. "You're serious," he said. "I've been serious since the lobby," she said. "You've just been catching up." He sat with this for a long moment. She let him sit with it, because the enormity of what she was proposing deserved a moment, and because she was tired enough that silence was no longer uncomfortable. "There will be people who try to use you," he said, "who see your position and what you know and want to leverage it. There were people in the ER who tried to get controlled substances from a nurse they thought was too tired to notice," she said. "I noticed every time. This is different in scale. The principle is the same. Know what you have, know what it's worth. Don't let someone else define it for you." She looked at the table. "My father knew that. He just never taught it to me directly." She looked up. "I'm learning it now." Lucian reached out and put his right hand on the papers between them. She looked at his hand. Then she put hers on top of it, not romantically, not dramatically, but in the way of two people who have survived the same night and understand that what comes next will require both of them to be honest about what they are and what they owe each other. "The foundation," he said. "That's what you said. Ensuring the fortune can't be used for destruction. I said what I meant. I know. I'm telling you I heard it." He paused. "There's a board, 3 people currently. They'll have questions. I have answers. They won't be easy questions." "None of the questions tonight were easy," she said. "I managed." Something in his face settled, not into happiness, which felt like the wrong word for what either of them was carrying at 5:53 in the morning after a night like this one, but into something that had the shape of resolution, the particular expression of someone who has been waiting for a piece to arrive and has finally heard it click into place. He took his hand from the papers. She took hers. She stood, moved to the window. The storm outside had made its decision. The blizzard was ending. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just retreating from itself the way all storms eventually do, leaving behind the particular white stillness of a city that has been through something and is now figuring out what it looks like on the other side. The lake was visible again, barely, a dark suggestion on the far edge of the city. The sky above the buildings was doing something to the east that was not yet light, but was the promise of light. That specific dark blue moment before dawn that only exists for 20 minutes, and that Vivian had always loved without knowing why. She thought now that maybe it was because it looked like survival, not triumph, just the simple, unremarkable fact of having made it through. "He sang to me every night," she said. Not to Lucian specifically, to the window, to the city, to the dark blue promise of morning. Every single night, the same songs, and I thought it was just what fathers do. She pressed her hand to the glass. The cold came through immediately, clean and honest. "I thought it was the most ordinary thing in the world." She heard Lucian move. He came to stand beside her, not behind her, beside her, and he looked out at the same city she was looking at, carrying the same night she was carrying, and he said nothing, which was the right thing. "He was wrong to keep it from me," she said. "Yes. But he was right that I'd figure it out." "Yes. And he was right that I'd know what to do." "Yes," Lucian said. "He was completely right about that." She took her hand from the glass. The cold clung to her palm for a moment before fading. "There are things I'll need," she said, already moving from the window back to the practicalities, because this was who she was. A person who looks at the dawn for exactly as long as she can afford to, and then turns around and gets to work. Access to Chen's full documentation, time with whatever legal architecture you've built. And I want to review every scholarship and housing payment from the last 11 years. Why? Because I want to know what I was given and make sure it was given cleanly. She turned to look at him. If any of it came from bad money, I want to know. And I want to figure out how to address that. He looked at her for a long moment. "That's going to be a complicated accounting." "I know," she said. "I'm good at complicated accounting, apparently. It's hereditary." He exhaled. Not quite a laugh, but close. The sound of something very tightly held allowing itself, just briefly, just a little, to let go. She crossed back to the table and gathered the papers, hers, his, the full record, and squared them neatly together, the way her father had always squared papers, edges flush, corners aligned, everything in its proper order. She held them for a moment, the weight of them, the specific density of a thing that has cost a great deal to produce. "What happened to him at the end?" she said. "I want to know, the real version, not the police report." Lucian was quiet. I know it's bad, she said. I've had 12 years to imagine it. I can handle the real version. He came back to the table and sat down across from her, and he told her. He told her quietly, with the specific economy of someone who respects the gravity of what they're saying, enough not to dress it up. He told her about the 2 weeks, and what her father had endured, and the message he'd sent through the guard, and how they had found him, and what his final state had been, and that he had not been alone at the end because Lucian's father had sent someone, had made sure of that, had considered it the least he could do and understood it was not enough. She listened. She did not cry, not then. The crying, when it came, would come later, in private, in whatever space she built for herself on the other side of this night. But she listened to every word, and she let herself know it, and she let the knowing settle into the place it belonged, alongside everything else her father had left her that she hadn't known she was carrying. When Lucien finished, the room was quiet. He didn't break, she said. No, he didn't say a word. He was protecting me, she said. He was protecting you, Lucien said. Everything he did from the moment he understood what was coming was about protecting you. She nodded. She held the papers in her hands and she breathed, and she let herself feel for a moment the full weight of what it meant to have been loved like that. Not gently, not simply, but with everything, with a man's entire life held out as a shield so that she could grow up and be a nurse and worry about potassium levels and live in apartment 4C and be, for as long as possible, free. He had given her freedom. And in the end, when freedom was no longer available, he had given her everything she needed to survive without it. That was Arthur Hale. That was her father, the most boring, careful, ordinary man she had ever known, who had also been, underneath everything, the most dangerous. She loved him for both. Dawn came. Not all at once, gradually, the way dawn always comes, in degrees and adjustments, the sky over Chicago moving from dark blue through layers of purple and pale gray, until the first actual light touched the tops of the buildings and the lake opened up to the east, dark and vast and indifferent to everything that had happened in the night. Vivian stood at the window and watched it and let it happen. Lucien stood beside her. They had been talking off and on for the past hour. Practical things, logistics, the immediate next 48 hours, what needed to happen and in what order. They had not been talking about what existed between them, because what existed between them was still too new and too complicated and too honest for the kind of language that usually gets applied to these things, and neither of them was inclined to cheapen it. She was still wearing her hospital scrubs. The name badge was still clipped to her chest. She reached up and unclipped it and held it in her hand for a moment. Vivian Hale, RN, Emergency Department, and then set it on the window ledge. Not a goodbye, just a setting down. The promise, she said. The one you made to my father. You said it ended when you found me. Yes, he said. So what comes after it? He turned to look at her. The morning light was doing something to the room now, filling it with the kind of ordinary, imperfect daylight that exists after storms, when everything looks slightly raw and very real. Whatever you decide it is, he said. She looked at him. She took in the cut above his eye and the wrapped hand and the shadow of a night that had cost them both things they would not stop paying for a long time, and she made the same kind of inventory she made of people in the ER. Not the wounds, not the damage, but the person underneath the damage. What was there? What it held? What she found held. I'm not a prize, she said, or a protected person, or a debt that got paid. I know what you are, he said. Then say it. He looked at her steadily. You're the person who kept singing while men were coming through the door, he said. You're the person who hit an armed man with a brass lamp and called it destabilizing his foundation. You're the person who sat across from Salvatore De Luca and made yourself the only variable that mattered. He paused. And you're Arthur Hale's daughter, which means you're the most dangerous kind of person there is, the kind that doesn't look dangerous at all until it's too late. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and straightened the collar of his jacket, which had been wrong since the fight, and she left her hand there for a moment against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, present and steady and real under her palm. Okay, she said. He put his right hand over hers. He did not move it. They stood there in the morning light with the city opening up below them and the storm gone and the weight of the night settling slowly into the past where it belonged. And neither of them said anything else, because nothing else needed to be said. Outside, Chicago was waking up. The plows were moving on the streets below, pushing back the evidence of the blizzard, restoring the ordinary geography of a city that had no idea what had happened in the night above its rooftops. People were beginning to appear on sidewalks, collars up, breath visible, moving through the new snow with the particular determination of a city that has seen worse and expects to see worse still and moves forward regardless. Vivian watched them and thought about her father, who had moved through the city for 20 years carrying the most expensive secret anyone had ever trusted him with, disguised as the most ordinary man in any room he entered. She thought about what it had cost him and what it had made of her, and she thought finally about what she was going to do with a life that had just been completely and irrevocably remade. Not destroyed, not ended, but remade, the way things are remade when they go through enough heat and pressure to change their fundamental structure. She was still a nurse. That was not a thing that happened to you and then unhappened. It was in the way she moved and the way she thought, and the decisions she made when everything was moving wrong. And no amount of blizzards or crime bosses or lullaby codes was going to take it out of her. But she was also Arthur Hale's daughter. She always had been. She was just finally beginning to understand what that meant in its entirety. She took her hand from Lucian's chest. She picked up the papers from the window ledge. She tucked them under her arm. "I need coffee," she said. "Actual coffee, not whatever that was earlier. And then I need to call the hospital and tell them I won't be in today." She paused. "Or possibly for a few days." "There's coffee," he said. "I know, I found the cabinet at 4 in the morning." He almost smiled again, closer this time. She turned from the window and walked into the kitchen and found the coffee where she'd found it before, and she made it with the focus of someone who has decided that this particular ordinary thing is going to happen regardless of what else is happening around it, because some ordinary things are worth insisting on. The coffee brewed. The city turned under the winter sun. The papers sat on the counter beside her, edges flush, corners aligned, everything her father had known and protected, and finally, at the cost of everything he had, passed forward. She poured 2 cups. She set one on the counter for Lucian, who was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed and his shoulder and his hand and everything else, watching her with the expression she was beginning to recognize as his baseline, that quality of attention that had nothing performative in it, that simply said, "I see you, and I'm not looking away." She picked up her own cup. She drank. It was ordinary and necessary and real, and the morning was real, and the storm was over, and her father had trusted her with the most important thing he had, and she had not failed him, and whatever came next was going to be difficult and complicated and probably dangerous in ways she couldn't yet anticipate. She was ready for it. Not because she wasn't afraid. She was afraid. Her hands were still carrying the faint tremor of a night that had asked everything of her, and she knew that in 2 days, or 5, or 10, something was going to crack open that she was currently holding shut by will and exhaustion, and she was going to have to sit with her father's death in a new way, and that was going to cost her. But she was ready anyway, because ready had never meant unafraid. It had always meant, "I'll move forward regardless." Her father had taught her that too. She just hadn't known, until now, that he had. She stood in the kitchen of the 43rd floor with her coffee and her father's songs and the morning coming through the glass, and she was Vivian Hale, and she was Arthur Hale's daughter, and she was both of those things completely, and she was still standing. That was enough. For now, that was entirely enough.